Welcome to today's daily devotion. We're walking in wisdom. We're learning more every day. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 9. Solomon has been talking about the hedonistic lifestyle that he's been living. Whatever he wanted, he took. He was living the life of today's celebrities and entrepreneurs and of those who have everything that money can buy. He had it all. Within it all, he was finding life meaningless. He also tried to live like a fool, and then he tried to live like a madman. And then he says this, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 9, he says, "In all this, my wisdom stayed with me." A primary reason why we need to find meaning is because as a result of the fall, life is hard. We need a reason to keep on going when everyone around us is giving up, and a reason to make something of our lives. And the test is to build and maintain integrity and purity whilst traversing the avenues of life. And that's not easy because the nature of the world is against us. There is something spiritual that is against us, as well as there being something elemental that is against us. Objects that object to our presence in the world. Objects that object to what matters to us in life. And we have to become something whilst being in the world. Whilst being in the world, we have to become something when the world is not for us but against us. Of course, God is for us. God is for us. And if God is for us, who can be against us? Well, the world is against us. And yet, God is for us. And so by the grace of God, we will become something. Yeah. There's no one who can keep company with fools, though, without becoming foolish. Entropy is against you, and you naturally become like those with whom you associate. Nobody can try their hand at decadence without becoming decadent. And with every fantasy that we chase, our lives become increasingly meaningless, chasing after the wind. Solomon was wise, but he has already told us that he tried foolishness and madness, and nobody can get away with that scot-free. There were grave consequences for all of Solomon's misgivings and misdoings and allowing himself to follow his drives. Ultimately, it caused the kingdom that God had given him to be torn apart. The aftermath of rejecting the light that God provides is always a fallen kingdom. It happened to Adam, happened to Solomon, and it happens to anyone who transgresses true values. You lose meaning. That means you lose substance. And when you lose substance, your world falls apart from the inside out. When someone has lost meaning in life, you can read it on their face. Their internal world collapses first. First, their internal world collapses. And then comes the fallout, the aftermath. Their kingdom crumbles. When Leonardo da Vinci was painting The Last Supper, he chose for a model someone who had all of the beauty and purity and innocence and angelic qualities that he felt could truly depict the face of Jesus. So he painted the face of Jesus. He found it much harder, more difficult to find somebody to model the face of Judas. He was looking for somebody with all of the villainy and treachery and evil that he thought Judas must have worn across his face. And he searched for year after year. It took him 10 years to find the right face And when he found him, he brought him to the church where he was painting the Last Supper and had him sit there modeling for him while Leonardo da Vinci painted the face of Judas. And as he was painting the face, the man said, "Don't you recognize me?" Leonardo came across and scrutinized his face and said, "There is nothing about you that I have ever seen before in my life." And the man said, "I am the man who 10 years ago sat here while you painted the face of Jesus." Yes. And what happened was shortly after that sitting, that first sitting, that he went out and began to lead a debauched life, and he gave up on his faith with God, and he went into violence and mayhem and butchery, and the serotonin that was released in his face and the diseases that he was catching so affected his visage, so affected his appearance, that he went from looking innocent and pure and beautiful to becoming ugly like sin. Yes, and it's no wonder that Leonardo da Vinci found him in a prison, because what happens is that when our lives and our values start crumbling around us, then we end up in the chains that we make for ourselves by breaking the structural integrity of our lives. Yet Solomon says, "In all of this, my wisdom stayed with me." Solomon was failing on so many levels. Life was becoming increasingly meaningless to him, yet his wisdom remained. What a conundrum. First, how can the wisest person in all the world be so foolish as to have multiple wives and 300 concubines and become polygamous? Secondly, how can you fall so far and yet retain the gift of God? Well, the answer to the first is a lesson in the nature of man. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And the answer to the second is a lesson in the nature of God, for the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. Solomon's gift was a gift of wisdom, and his calling was to rule the world, and he ruled it from Jerusalem. So, you want to find meaning here, in the here and now. Of course, we're going to be going to glory, and our ultimate meaning is found outside of this world, but you can also apply yourself to being able to find the purpose and the reason why you are here in this earth today. And the way that you do that is by discovering the gifts that God has given to you and by finding your calling. And then you use your gifts, you use your talents, you use how God has made you to fulfill the calling that God has given you. Don't try doing things outside of your calling. Stay in your calling and make sure that you use the gifts that God has given you, because it is possible to lose what you've got. Use it or lose it, says the old adage. A gift is like a muscle. If you don't use it, the muscle will atrophy. Jesus' parable of the talents tells us that anyone who hides their talents will see their gift given to others. And that's exactly what happened to Solomon. His kingdom was divided and taken over by Jeroboam. And if you find yourself wondering why the world seems so meaningless, perhaps it's due to the fact that you have dissipated the gift that God has given you on fruitless pursuits, the life that God has given you on fruitless pursuits, and chosen the safe and mediocre way instead of stepping into the calling that God has for you. Think about it. When you use your gifts and talents to fulfill your calling instead of looking at others and wondering what it would be like to be like them, then you'll be living the life that makes others wonder what it must feel like to be you. Let me say that again. When you use your gifts and talents to fulfill your calling, instead of looking at others and wondering what it would be like to be them, then you'll be living the life that makes others wonder what it must feel like to be you. So go ahead and seize your day. Take those gifts, those talents that God has given you, and apply them in the calling that God has called you to live in. Don't be foolish and break your values. Hold on to your integrity. Hold on to what's right and true. Maintain your innocence, and you will not see your kingdom crumble. And God will bless you. And we'll see you tomorrow for more wisdom out of the book of Ecclesiastes.